My name is Malik Townsend, and on a quiet Tuesday afternoon during a work trip in Austin, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I'd ignore it. My phone constantly buzzed with telemarketers, spam alerts, and scheduling reminders. But something about the loneliness of a hotel room halfway across the country made me pick up. The clock on the wall ticked past 3, and the late spring sun slanted through the blinds, dust motes dancing in the beam. I pressed the receiver to my ear and offered a tentative, "Hello." On the other end was a rough voice, gravelly but not unkind, asking, "Is this Mr. Townsend?" My brow furrowed. "Yes. Who is this?" I replied. There was a hesitation, a breath heavy with caution. Then the man introduced himself. "My name is Frank DeMarco. I own DeMarco's Pawn and Gold on Riverside. I believe I have something that belongs to you, a Rolex Submariner." I froze. That was impossible. I kept my father's watch locked in the safe at home. Dad's Rolex Submariner was more than a timepiece. It was the only thing I had left of him. I remember the leather-lined box he pressed into my hand the day before he died of pancreatic cancer, his fingers trembling as he murmured, "This is yours, Malik. Not because it's valuable, but because I earned every second on it with you." I tucked the watch into its box, placed it behind the rows of important documents, and left it there. I never imagined anyone would dare touch it, let alone sell it. My heart thudded against my ribs, and I looked around my sterile hotel room, half expecting to see Dad's face on the wall, shaking his head in disbelief. I swallowed hard and forced my voice to steady. "I'm sorry, did you say you have my watch?" Silence. Then Frank spoke again. "Yes, sir. It's here at my shop. You'd better come in. There's something inside it I think you were meant to find." I felt as though the ground had shifted beneath me. Something inside it? The idea sounded absurd, like a plot twist in one of those detective shows Janelle and I used to binge. But this was real life. I rummaged for my phone and opened the camera roll, scrolling back through pictures until I found the last photo I'd taken of the watch, me holding its gleaming bezel up to the sunlight, the hands frozen at 5:14 p.m. The moment I'd snapped the shot before racing to the airport. That image was proof enough that the watch had been in my possession less than a week ago, and now it was here, in the hands of a stranger who claimed to know something hidden inside its case. My mind raced. Could there be a hidden compartment? A clue? A message? The camera roll offered no answers, just that frozen image of Dad's watch, untarnished and unworn on my wrist. Outside, the sun had dipped lower, and the first cars of evening traffic hummed on Congress Avenue. I could almost hear the honking, the low roar of engines, the distant laughter drifting from a bar. I pressed Frank again, my voice urgent. "Where are you located exactly?" He gave me directions. Riverside, just past the bridge off 3rd Street, then added, "I can wait for you. But sir, you need to come in today." A flutter of dread and hope ignited in my chest. Dread at the thought of someone rifling through my father's keepsake. Hope that whatever was inside might explain something, maybe even point me toward answers for other mysteries Dad left behind when he passed. I grabbed my wallet, booked an Uber for the earliest pickup, and rushed through the motions of packing a bag, phone charger, laptop, a few shirts. Though I knew I wouldn't be staying the night, I had to get this watch back and uncover what Dad had hidden. As I slid into the back seat of the rideshare, I stared out the window at the pastel buildings and palm trees blurring by, rehearsing what I would say to Frank. "That watch is mine. Please tell me you haven't sold it." I tried to prepare for hostility, negotiation, legal threats, and yet, beneath it all, I felt an odd excitement. My father had always been a meticulous man. If he'd smuggled something inside that watch, it must be important. Maybe it would reveal some family secret, or a final message meant only for me. Maybe it would remind me of who Dad truly was. The car stopped at the curb in front of a weathered brick storefront, DeMarco's Pawn and Gold. A dusty neon sign flickered, DeMarco's, the S sputtering. I paid the driver, offered a nod, and stepped onto the cracked sidewalk. The bell above the door jingled as I entered, and a wave of stale air met me. Metal, old leather, the faint musk of desperation that clings to places where people trade valuables for quick cash. Behind the counter stood Frank, his lined face framed by a salt and pepper beard, a sharp yet sympathetic. He nodded, and without a word, lifted a worn leather case from beneath the counter and set it before me. I recognized the familiar heft of Dad's Rolex inside its cushion, untouched and perfect. My voice caught as I whispered, "That's mine." Frank met my gaze. I almost processed it normally, he said, until I checked the serial and something felt off. Then I opened it and found this. He slid a small tool across the velvet and clicked a hidden button on the watch's case back, a mechanism I never knew existed. With a soft click, the back popped open, revealing a tiny folded paper tucked inside. I didn't read it, Frank confessed. Didn't feel right. Figured it was meant for your eyes. My hands trembled as I accepted the watch and unfolded the brittle note in Dad's familiar handwriting. But that discovery and what it meant would have to wait until I'd read every word. Sir, you need to come in. There's something inside this watch I think you were meant to find. That watch wasn't just a Rolex. It was the only thing my father left me when he passed, and every time I thought of it, I saw his calloused hands brushing the dial's polished surface and heard his soft voice reminding me that time was our most precious gift. He wore it through every hard-earned paycheck, every high school basketball game he came to watch, every late-night conversation where he comforted me after a fight with my mom or cheered me on when I struggled with self-doubt. I remember the way light caught the bracelet's links, glinting gold and steel as he lifted it from his wrist and pressed it into my palm. This is yours, Malik, he had said, steady but gentle. Not because it's valuable, but because I earned every second on it with you. He paused, his gaze drifting toward the window where the autumn sun painted our living room in pink and orange, and then looked back at me. Wear it when you need to remember that I'm still with you, no matter where life takes you. Then he fell silent, breathing shallowly, and I sat beside him, holding that watch like it contained the weight of his love, the sum of every memory we shared. When he died of pancreatic cancer a week later, I locked the watch away in the safe at home, afraid that wearing it would somehow break the fragile bond that connected me to him. I told myself I was protecting it, preserving his legacy, but in truth, I wanted to hold on to the idea of him intact, unmoved by the passage of time. Now, standing in the harsh fluorescent light of DeMarco's pawn and gold, I realized how deeply I had underestimated my own need for that tactile connection to Dad. Losing the watch felt like losing him all over again. My chest tightened as I remembered the last photo I'd taken of it. Dad's Rolex resting on the edge of my desk, the hands frozen at the moment I'd snapped the picture before rushing to pack for this business trip. I'd meant to wear it once I got home, to show it off to my colleagues, to feel his presence with each glance at my wrist. Instead, I left it in the drawer, convinced I'd always return to it. I tucked the watch into the soft cloth Frank handed me, the weight reassuring against my palm even as my heart pounded with betrayal and confusion. How had it ended up here? As the memory of my father's final words echoed in my mind, I realized I was not only grappling with the theft of a sentimental heirloom, but with the unsettling knowledge that someone close to me, someone I trusted, had ventured into the darkness of my life, rifled through my most private keepsake, and sold it for cash. Janelle's face flashed before me, her gentle smile that once made me feel at home, the way her eyes lit up when we talked about our future. And then her recent distance, the late-night phone calls she claimed were just with friends, the evenings she spent out of the house without explanation. I thought back to her sister Aubrey moving in 5 months ago, ostensibly because she needed a place after her breakup, but more likely because she had schemes of her own. She was always chasing the next big thing, the next startup, convinced that one good idea would solve all her problems. I remembered the way she'd watched Dad's watch when I unpacked for this trip, her eyes lingering on the leather-lined box as if she was calculating its worth in dollars and cents. My marriage felt like a fortress, one I had helped build with trust and shared dreams, but now I saw cracks in the foundation, cracks I had refused to acknowledge until this moment. I thought of the conversations Janelle and I had had last week, when I told her I needed to extend my trip by 2 days to close a client deal, and she'd smiled slyly, saying, "Take your time. We've got everything under control." At the time, I'd interpreted her words as support. Now I saw them as the last piece in a puzzle of deception. My pulse quickened as I recalled how I had tossed and turned at night wondering why she never asked questions about dinner plans or how I was feeling, how she avoided talk about Dad's birthday next month. Guilt and anger surged together, a bitter cocktail that left me breathless. I slid the watch into my jacket pocket, feeling its reassuring bulk as I stood in the pawnshop's cramped back room, rows of pawn tickets pinned to corkboards like badges of desperation. Frank watched me with sympathetic eyes, as though reading the turmoil written on my face. "Sir," he said quietly, "I'm sorry you're going through this." His words felt like cold water splashed across my skin, shocking in their kindness. I nodded, unable to speak, and forced myself to breathe deeply. Outside, the afternoon light had dimmed to a golden haze, and I felt a surge of resolve. Dad had built our family on values of honesty, integrity, and resilience. He had taught me that setbacks were opportunities to learn, that betrayal could be overcome with truth. With that watch restored to my possession, I felt a renewed determination to uncover the truth behind its disappearance, to confront whoever had dared to steal my heritage, and to reclaim not just a timepiece, but the legacy and love my father had entrusted to me. I slipped a 20 onto the counter, thanked Frank, and turned toward the door, mind racing with plans for how I would use every resource at my disposal to find the answers I deserved. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in bruised purples and fiery oranges as I stepped back onto the sidewalk, the watch burning a hole in my pocket, a steady reminder that though someone had taken the watch, they could never steal the time my father had given me. The moment I stepped back into DeMarco's pawn and gold, the air seemed to thrum with possibility and dread. The bell above the door jingled sharply, announcing my arrival to the cluttered sanctuary of lost valuables and desperate bargains. Rows of glass display cases gleamed under harsh fluorescent lights, showcasing gold chains tangled like serpents, faded paintings begging for a new home, and dusty heirlooms whose owners had long since given up hope of ever reclaiming them. Behind the counter, Frank DeMarco regarded me with a steady gaze that combined sympathy and professional caution. His burly frame, clad in a faded denim shirt streaked with grease, suggested decades spent handling other people's most cherished possessions. When I approached, he nodded once and motioned me behind the thick counter, away from prying eyes. I felt the weight of every pawn ticket in that shop pressing against me, as though each one bore witness to my own loss. Frank placed a worn leather case on the counter with reverence I hadn't expected in a pawn shop. "This is the one," he said softly, his voice low. The case looked plain, scuffed edges, a tarnished latch, but I recognized it instantly as the box my father had kept his Rolex in. My heart thudded as I eased the latch open. There it was, the familiar curve of polished steel and gold links, the deep blue bezel glinting under the shop lights. Even without wearing it, I could feel its reassuring weight in my hand. I cradled the watch as though it were fragile, a sacred relic whose survival against unimaginable odds validated every memory I'd cherished. Frank watched me for a long moment, then cleared his throat. "I almost processed it normally," he admitted, leaning closer and lowering his voice further. "But the serial number didn't match our records for similar models. Then I noticed something else, something hidden." My pulse quickened. Hidden? I barely knew my breath was shallow until Frank produced a small metal tool from a hidden pocket in his apron. With deliberate care, he clicked it against the edge of the watch's case back. A faint hiss sounded as a secret button released, and the back popped open with a delicate snap. I leaned in, eyes widening. Inside the compartment lay a tiny folded square of paper, creased and partly discolored with age. My father's handwriting, neat, unwavering, sprawled across the yellowed surface. The sight of it sent a shiver through me, as though he had reached from beyond the grave to send this message specifically when I needed it most. But I didn't touch it. Frank held the watch and paper out to me like an offering. "I didn't read it," he said. "I sincere. Didn't feel right. Felt like it was meant for your eyes only." His restraint somehow relieved me. I realized I trusted him more than I ever trusted Janelle or Aubrey. I closed my fingers around the watch, feeling every ridge of its face, every contour of its links, and gently transferred it into my own grip. The hidden note stayed folded, its contents unspoiled by outside hands. As I stood there, I became acutely aware of the pawn shop's soundtrack, the soft hum of the air conditioner, the distant rumble of traffic on Riverside, the patient clink of a bracelet sliding against glass as another customer browsed. The contrast between this place of commerce and the intensely personal nature of what I held in my hand was almost surreal. I thought of the countless times Dad had polished that very watch while telling me stories of his own father, a man who had crossed oceans during wartime and carried a compass that somehow ended up in my possession later. Our family history felt suddenly alive again, each generation linked by keepsakes imbued with hidden meaning. It occurred to me that this pawn shop, for all its grit and desperation, was the perfect crucible for discovery, the place where lost things surface, where secrets demand to be revealed. Frank broke the silence. I should tell you who sold it, he said, his tone gentle but firm. It wasn't some stranger dropping off an old watch. The seller was a woman in her early 30s, wavy hair, distinctive scar on her left eyebrow. She said she was your wife. Signed the ticket as Janelle Aubrey Townsend. My stomach lurched, and I felt my knees go weak. Janelle. She had claimed she didn't know where the watch was, that it must have been misplaced. To hear that she'd personally brought it here, beneath my nose, felt like a betrayal so deep it threatened to drown me. Frank cleared his throat. I almost filed it and sent her out, but she had a story, money troubles, some startup idea she insisted was going to make her millions. Talked about a boyfriend's big app idea. My hand tightened around the watch, the metal bracelet biting into my palm. I barely heard Frank's next words. Sir, I've been in this business 30 years. That woman knew it wasn't hers. I'm not processing this. Take it off the record. His offer felt like a lifeline. He didn't ask for payment, just nodded to indicate that what had happened here would stay here. I swallowed hard and managed a shaky, thank you. I slid some cash across the counter, more than the standard fee. But Frank waved it aside. Keep it, he said. Just promise me you'll take care of it. I pocketed the watch, still folded paper and all, and slung my jacket over my arm. As I turned to leave, I paused at the doorway, looked back at the man who had treated my father's legacy with care I never imagined finding in a pawnshop, and realized how precious empathy could be in a world so often ruled by transaction. Outside, the afternoon sun had waned, and the sky was clouded in pale gray. I took a deep breath, ready to face the truth waiting in that hidden note, and ready, too, to confront the wife who had betrayed me. With the watch secured in my pocket, I stepped back into the street, a man armed with both evidence and resolve, determined to uncover every secret my father had concealed and to reclaim the legacy that was rightfully mine. Frank's words echoed in my mind as I drove away from the pawnshop, the weight of betrayal pressing down on me like a physical force. Janelle? My wife had signed her name on that pawn ticket, had looked Frank in the eye and claimed that Dad's watch was hers to sell. The realization hit me with the cold finality of a slammed door. She knew exactly what she was doing. I followed Riverside out toward the highway, every turn of the wheel swirling memories of our life together. Our wedding day laugh as the photographer chased us with confetti, the late-night conversations around our kitchen island, the shared plans for home renovations and family vacations. Each memory now felt laced with deception, as if the foundation on which we'd built our marriage had been carefully undermined right beneath my feet. I took the next exit, heart pounding, and made my way home in a daze. The neighborhood was quiet, the houses set back behind neatly trimmed lawns and flowering hedges, as if nothing in the world could disrupt that serene picture. But I knew differently, nothing would be the same again. I parked in our driveway and sat behind the wheel for a long moment, staring at the back of Janelle's car in the garage. The air inside the car felt heavy, stale, and I wondered if I would ever feel at ease in that house again. Finally, I braced myself, stepped out, and walked up the front steps, counting each one like a countdown to confrontation. The door swung open before I could knock, and there she stood. Janelle, brushing flour from her jeans, flour that must have come from some pastry experiment gone awry. Her eyes widened as she spotted me, and I held up the small leather case that contained Dad's watch. Aubrey, her sister, appeared behind her in the hallway, arms crossed and a smug look on her face that made my blood boil. Looking for this? I asked, my voice low but steady, as I set the case on the kitchen counter. The world seemed to narrow until all I could see was Janelle's face, full of guilt and surprise. For a long, uncomfortable silence, no one spoke. Finally, Janelle opened her mouth, hesitated, and said, I was going to tell you. But the words sounded hollow, as if she had strung them together without conviction. I shook my head slowly. You sold my dad's watch, I said, letting each word land heavy between us. The only thing you left me. Her jaw tightened, and she looked away. It was just sitting in a drawer, Malik. You don't even wear it. She spoke too quickly, too guiltily, and I realized that this wasn't just a one-time mistake. It was a calculated decision. Aubrey leaned in, voice dripping with disdain. Besides, you weren't using it. We needed money. The pronoun, we, made my chest ache. I heard it as a deliberate claim on something that was never theirs to take. I clenched my fists, resisting the urge to grab her shoulders and shake her until she understood the depth of her betrayal. Instead, I took a breath, forcing my voice to remain calm. Whose money? I asked pointedly. Because you signed the ticket as Janelle Aubrey Townsend, and the seller's story to Frank was that you needed cash for a startup, your boyfriend's big app idea. Janelle's eyes flicked to Aubrey, and in that moment I saw fear ripple across her features. Aubrey took a step back, as though she couldn't hold my gaze any longer. He's not my boyfriend, Janelle said defensively, voice trembling. He's a business partner. I laughed, hollow and credulous. Right? A business partner you needed to fund with my father's legacy. I leaned forward, voice cold. You used my inheritance to invest in someone else's dreams. The room felt too small, the fluorescent ceiling light too bright. My betrayal flared into anger so fierce I felt it burn through my chest. Janelle crossed her arms, shielding herself from my hurt as though it were something she could block. We're married, Malik, she said, as if that statement gave her license to take what she pleased. What's yours is mine. The old adage stung worse than any slap, because it revealed how little respect she had for my family or for the bond my father and I had shared. This watch was my father's last gift, I said, voice rising. Not a marital asset to be liquidated. You treated his memories like a commodity. Aubrey shifted uncomfortably, and I realized she was no longer the confident sister, but an accomplice retreating from the consequences. I stood tall, though the room seemed to close in on me. I'm filing a theft report. I continued, each word deliberate. Not because I want revenge, because I can't pretend you're family anymore. I want you to face what you've done. Janelle's face went pale, and she opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Aubrey fled to the living room, her footsteps echoing down the hall like a retreating army. Janelle looked at me with tears glistening in her eyes. Malik, please, I interrupted her, voice steely. This isn't about apologies. It's about accountability. I gathered the leather case and turned toward the door, my heart pounding. As I reached the threshold, I paused and glanced back at her one last time. I realized then that the man who would walk back into that house would never be the same. A man shaped by betrayal, driven by the promise my father had left behind, and ready to reclaim every piece of the legacy that no hypocritical marriage nor opportunistic sister-in-law could ever steal from him. With that thought burning in my chest, I stepped out into the evening air, leaving behind a marriage undone and stepping into a future where every second, every heartbeat, belonged to me alone. I stepped through the doorway and was greeted by the sharp crackle of laughter that jarred against my nerves like a sudden downpour. Janelle and Aubrey stood side by side at the kitchen island, mimosa glasses in hand, their smiles bright and carefree as though the weight of the world rested somewhere far from this room. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating gold flecks in the bubbles that tinkled in their glasses. For a moment, I hesitated, as though I could turn away and pretend I hadn't seen them sipping celebration, but the leather case in my hand felt like a live coal, burning through my resolve until I knew I had to see this through. Their laughter faltered when they noticed me. The air shifted, the temperature dropped, and the smiles froze in place. Aubrey's eyes darted to Janelle, as if searching for an escape hatch. Janelle's own mask cracked, and I felt a thrill of satisfaction, tempered by a knot of sorrow tightening in my chest. I advanced to the counter, heart pounding in measured beats, and placed the box with deliberate care at the center. The veneer of normalcy shattered in that instant. Their poised suburban kitchen, with its immaculate counters and stainless steel appliances, felt transformed into a stage for reckoning. I cleared my throat, a gesture meant to underscore my control, then met Janelle's wide-eyed stare. Looking for this? I asked, voice calm but edged with steel. The box sat between us like a verdict waiting to be read, and in its silent presence lay all the questions that needed answers. Their silence stretched, taut, and uncomfortable. Glass chimed against glass as Aubrey set her mimosa aside without a word. Janelle's lips parted, and she seemed poised to launch into some rehearsed excuse, but the words died in her throat. When she finally spoke, her voice was small, tentative. I was going to tell you. The apology hovered on her tongue, unspoken, and I felt the fury coil in my gut. I didn't let her finish. You sold my dad's watch, I said, cutting through the air like lightning. The only thing he left me. The words landed with a thud that echoed in the cramped space between us. Aubrey's eyes flew to me, reflection of guilt and defiance mingled in her dark pupils. Janelle's jaw clenched, her knuckles whitening around the stem of her empty glass. She lifted her chin, defensiveness flaring in her cheeks. It was just sitting in a drawer, Malik. You don't even wear it. Aubrey's boyfriend. Your boyfriend, I corrected sharply, voice rising. The word hung in the air, brittle and accusatory, and her cheeks flushed a deep crimson. Aubrey averted her gaze, silent as a stone statue. My pulse thundered in my ears. This was no longer about a missing heirloom. It was about the truth behind the marriage I had believed in, the family I thought I had protected. I leaned forward, the muscles in my arms flexing as I braced against the countertop. You funded his startup with my father's legacy? I asked, each syllable deliberate. It was more than a question. It was a condemnation. The term startup felt like the ultimate insult, a frivolous dream built on the bones of my father's sacrifice. Janelle straightened, crossed her arms defiantly, as though shielding her chest from my words. We're married. What's yours is mine. It's just a watch, she said, voice steady but brittle. I saw the steel behind her words, the entitlement that had crept into our home like a thief in the night. I shook my head slowly. No, I said, each syllable measured. It was my father's last words in a box, and now it's evidence in a theft report. At the mention of police involvement, their postures shifted. Aubrey's eyes flicked to the door, as if searching for a route of escape. Janelle's smug expression faltered, replaced by a flicker of fear that made her vulnerability laughable and tragic all at once. She swallowed, and I noticed how her Adam's apple bobbed under her throat. You don't mean that, she said, voice wavering. You can't actually press charges. I straightened fully, lifting the box so that its weight anchored me in purpose. Oh, but I can, I said softly. And I will, unless we settle this. I let the silence hang for a moment, watching as beads of sweat formed at the temples of her carefully applied makeup. Aubrey's lips parted in protest, but Janelle raised a hand to quiet her sister. You're ruining everything, Janelle whispered, as if our entire life together was mere paper on the verge of being crumpled. Think of what this will do to our reputation, to our finances. Think of what you've already done to us. I cut in, voice sharp. You stole from my father. You sold his watch behind my back. That isn't just a lapse in judgment. It's a fundamental betrayal of trust. My words reached deep into the tangled history we shared, unraveling every memory of whispered promises and shared laughter. She looked away, eyes distant, as though unwilling to face the magnitude of her own actions. I lowered the box to the counter and pressed my fingers against the smooth leather, feeling the weight of the moment. If you want to repair this, I said, it begins with you returning every cent you took, and you both apologizing to me and to my father's memory. Otherwise, the police report goes through, and I'll see you both in court. Aubrey's face paled, and she slumped against the kitchen cabinet as though the air had been sucked from her lungs. Janelle's shoulders drooped, and for a fleeting second, I thought she might crumble. But then she lifted her chin, as though steeling herself. Fine, she said, voice small. We'll fix this. She trailed off, the words evaporating into the charged silence. I knew her promise meant little until she proved it, but at least she had blinked first. I turned away, the adrenaline draining from me in waves, and took a slow step toward the door. My hands trembled slightly, part fury, part relief. I had made my stance clear. I would not stand for betrayal or theft, no matter how close the perpetrator. At the threshold, I paused and looked back at them, two women who had once called themselves family, now strangers bound by deceit. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the floor, dividing the room into light and dark. I realized that our marriage existed on that knife's edge. One misstep, one act of dishonesty, and the life we'd built could shatter irrevocably. I gave them no more words. With one final nod, I stepped out into the hallway and out of the life I had known, carrying with me the scars of betrayal and the determination to rebuild a future grounded in truth. I ignored Janelle's protests and brusque denials the moment I reached our garage, following a narrow path through boxes and half-assembled shelving that had become a repository for years of postponed projects. The late afternoon light filtered through the dusty windows, casting long, golden beams across the concrete floor and illuminating swirling motes of sawdust suspended in the air. I had never much cared for this place, with its lingering smell of motor oil, old paint, and rust, but today it felt sacred, a private chapel holding remnants of my family's past. I paused at the threshold, my chest tight with anticipation, then flicked on the overhead light and stepped inside, closing the door firmly behind me. My fingers brushed the metal handle with purpose, as though it were a portal separating the world of betrayal upstairs from a realm of discovery below. Years ago, Dad had used this very garage to tinker on his old Chevy, to build wooden boats in the corner beside the workbench, and to teach me the fundamentals of tools and patience. On Sundays, he'd invite me out here, hand me a wrench, and show me how to replace spark plugs, always smiling, always patient. I remembered the warmth of those afternoons, the way his voice sounded as he guided my small hands, and how proud he was when I managed my first oil change without spilling a drop. After he passed, those memories felt like fragile treasures, so I'd stacked a crate of his belongings in back, untouched, convinced I would find a way to pass them down to my own children someday. Now, it seemed, that crate might hold the key to unearthing more than just memories. I moved toward the wooden crate, its rough-hewn boards splintered at the edges, and knelt before it. The lid had been cracked open. Janelle must have rifled through it looking for something to pawn, but the crate still contained layers of Dad's life, a faded baseball glove, my old Little League trophies, dog-eared manuals on woodworking techniques, and beneath them, an assortment of camping gear he'd once used to teach me navigation. My fingers traced the handles of a rolled-up compass pouch, the leather soft and worn. I tugged it free and unbuckled the strap, my breath catching when I recognized the brass casing glinting beneath the flap. Dad's compass, the one he'd used on family camping trips, the one he'd spun in his palm before pointing out constellations in the night sky. It felt as though time had stood still in that leather case, preserving a piece of him waiting for the moment I needed guidance most. With deliberate care, I opened the compass, expecting only the familiar needle to greet me. Instead, I felt the hollow chamber beneath the dial, and a faint click echoed in the stillness. My heart raced as I tilted the compass toward the light, revealing a tiny compartment I had never noticed before. My father had hidden something here, tucked away as though it were a secret treasure for me alone. I slid my fingertip across the seam and lifted out the compartment's contents, a small, antique key etched with the number 218. The brass was tarnished with age, but its teeth were sharp and precise, as though cut by a master locksmith. A key marked 218 carved from Dad's original compass. That realization sent a thrill of discovery crackling through me. I sat back on my heels, the compass and key cradled in my hands, and let the memory settle in my mind. Years earlier, Dad would press the compass into my palm and say, "No matter how lost you feel, this will point you home." He never mentioned a key, never hinted at a hidden purpose, but now the pieces of his last instructions were falling into place. The note hidden in the Rolex had directed me to First Vault Bank, Box 218, and here was the matching key. The synchronicity felt too precise to be coincidence. It was Dad's final puzzle designed to lead me beyond grief and betrayal towards something more substantial, an inheritance of both value and meaning. I closed my eyes and pictured him standing beside me, guiding my hands, his warm smile reassuring me that I was exactly where I needed to be. Rising to my feet, I slung the compass and key into my jacket pocket, zipped it shut, and took a steadying breath. I had no doubt about what came next, a drive back into town to the bank where Dad had arranged for his secret vault. I paused at the door to the garage, resisting a pang of nostalgia for simpler days. Once outside, the sun was dipping closer to the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and fiery oranges that mirrored the turmoil in my heart. I climbed into my car and turned the key in the ignition, each lurch of the engine echoing the pulse of excitement and apprehension coursing through me. The bank loomed ahead as I navigated the familiar streets, an imposing neoclassical building of limestone columns and etched glass windows that gleamed in the fading light. I parked in the lot out front, heart pounding, and stepped onto the pavement, sliding the key from my pocket to feel its reassuring weight. Through the revolving door, I entered a hushed lobby where polished marble floors reflected the glow of crystal chandeliers. A uniformed teller greeted me with a nod as I approached the desk. My voice was steady when I spoke. "I need access to Box 218, under my father's name, Christopher Townsend." She studied me for a moment, then tapped at her computer. A small compartment slid open in the counter, revealing the safe deposit keyhole. My chest tightened as I inserted Dad's key and turned it with a soft click. The door swung open, and inside lay the very pulse of my father's careful planning, a small stack of items that beckoned with promise. I reached in and lifted out a plain brown folder stamped with my father's initials. Beneath it lay a set of bearer bonds bound with ribbon, their crisp paper edges glowing like hidden treasure, and beneath those, a folded letter in Dad's stoic handwriting. My breath caught as I traced his signature at the bottom. The vault was no mere safety deposit box. It was a testament to Dad's diligence, his love, and his belief in my future. I had found more than the watch. I had uncovered the blueprint for rebuilding my life. With those discoveries cradled in my arms, I stepped back into the lobby, carrying not just artifacts, but the living legacy of a father who had loved me enough to guide me even after he was gone. The moment I stepped out of First Vault Bank, folder and bonds secured in my satchel, I knew I needed professional help to turn Dad's meticulous records into real-world recovery. I drove straight to the address Raina Frazier had given me. A modest brick office nestled between a law firm whose brass plaque gleamed arrogantly and a coffee shop that drifted the scent of espresso and baked goods onto the sidewalk. Raina's reputation preceded her, a specialist in estate asset recovery, someone who had helped countless clients reclaim what was rightfully theirs after death or deception. My hands still trembled from excitement and exhaustion as I rang the bell for the second-floor suite. The door opened to a waiting area furnished with tasteful leather chairs, abstract art, and a low shelf of law journals. Raina herself emerged from an inner office, tall and poised, with a professional yet warm smile that immediately put me at ease. She extended her hand, her grip firm, eyes sharp behind sleek glasses. I offered the briefcase with a nod. "Mr. Townsend," she said, voice confident. "Let's get to work." We settled at her conference table, where she spread out Dad's invoices alongside the bearer bonds and the folded letter I had retrieved. I watched as she leafed through each document, brow furrowing and then lifting in admiration. "Your father was thorough," she remarked. "Every contractor job, every unfinished payment, every owed dollar meticulously documented. He anticipated what would happen after his passing." I felt a swell of pride for him and a pang of regret that I hadn't known his plans sooner. She tapped the folder labeled Townsend Contractors and asked, "Have you had any contact with these companies?" I shook my head, recalling how Sullivan and Drake had ghosted our family shortly after Dad's diagnosis, ignoring repeated calls and letters. Raina nodded. "Good. That means no disputes yet. We'll file a formal demand for payment with certified letters, and if they continue to ignore us, we'll escalate to a lawsuit." I exhaled, the tension between hope and dread resolving into a clear path forward. Raina leaned back, steepling her fingers. "The bearer bonds are a separate matter. They're negotiable instruments made out to the holder, so you can cash them at the bank. But I recommend holding on to them until we secure at least the largest outstanding debts. It'll give us more leverage if we need to negotiate settlements." I blinked, absorbing her strategic counsel. The bonds were worth a considerable sum, over $100,000, and the idea of cashing them felt thrilling and terrifying all at once. I pictured Dad's letter urging me to seize opportunity, and I knew he would have wanted me to act decisively. Over the next hour, we mapped out an action plan. Raina drafted demand letters to each contractor, giving them 10 business days to respond before filing claims in civil court. She prepared the paperwork to have the bearer bonds transferred to my name, and she outlined the process for submitting evidence of the stolen Rolex to the police and to the pawnshop, should I choose to press charges. She advised me to file the theft report promptly, to strengthen my legal standing, and to demonstrate that I had taken all necessary steps to reclaim what was mine. As she spoke, I realized how empowered I felt. For the first time since discovering the watch's disappearance, I wasn't just reacting, I was proactively enforcing my rights. At one point, Raina paused and studied me. "Mr. Townsend, you're not required to let this lie fall apart your personal life. You deserve accountability, but you also deserve closure. Once we recover what was lost, I suggest using a portion of the funds to establish a trust or foundation in your father's name. That way, his legacy of integrity can continue to benefit others." The idea struck me in the chest, stirring an emotional hopefulness I hadn't felt since Dad's death. I could see it. A scholarship for young engineers, a fund to help families navigate medical expenses, something that honored his memory and transformed our pain into purpose. I swallowed hard, nodding. "I love that idea." Raina smiled, her eyes kind. "I'll draft the necessary documents. For now, let's focus on the recovery." She handed me a timeline. Certified letters to be sent by day 3, bond transfer paperwork by day 5, theft report filed by day 2, and strategy for possible litigation by day 14. Each milestone represented a step closer to reclaiming Dad's legacy, and to reclaiming my own sense of stability and trust. I left her office clutching the timeline and a renewed sense of direction, the bonds and invoices heavy in my bag, but somehow more comforting than they had ever been. Driving home, I reflected on how Dad's careful planning had saved me from the kind of financial ruin that might have befall when Janelle and Aubrey emptied our accounts and sold off treasured possessions. Instead of bitterness, I felt a resolute gratitude that his foresight had given me the means to fight back. I thought of the men and women at those construction firms, of the contractors who had called Dad late at night to settle an invoice, of the bond issuers who had recognized his signature. Each connection reinforced the truth that my father's life had been one of purpose and impact, and that now I had the responsibility to carry that forward. When I arrived home, the house was silent and vacant. Janelle and Aubrey had moved their things out, leaving only dust on the counters and the stale scent of abandoned dreams. I set my briefcase on the kitchen island, the morning sun filtering through the blinds in a soft glow. I imagined writing emails to those contractors, felt the thrill of organizing legal filings, and sensed a calm determination settle over me. For the first time in months, I felt whole. The path ahead would be challenging: court dates, negotiations, possible appeals. But I was ready. I had the watch, the key, the bonds, and now a lawyer whose expertise matched my resolve. I took a deep breath, letting the warmth of the sunlight fill me, and whispered to Dad in my heart, "I'm coming home, and I'll make you proud." I gave Janelle one last chance to set things right before I closed the door on the life we had built together. The morning air was crisp as I walked through our front hallway, carrying the leather case that held Dad's Rolex, its hidden note compartment still resonating with the weight of his final instructions. The light slanted through the windows, dust motes drifting in the beams like memories suspended in time. The house was quiet, eerily so, since Janelle and Aubrey had fled upstairs when I confronted them in the kitchen. I paused at the bottom of the stairs, reminded of the laughter and clinking glasses from only hours before, the comfortable warmth of a home I no longer recognized. My heart tightened at the thought of confrontation, but I steeled myself, determined to lay down one final boundary. I climbed the stairs and found Janelle standing in our bedroom doorway, her shoulders hunched as though bracing against a gust of cold wind. She was clutching a half-empty box of tissues, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy. Behind her, Aubrey's belongings, cheap suitcases, a rock garden sculpture, remnants of Aubrey's fleeting stay, were already piled by the closet. Aubrey herself hovered in the hallway, arms crossed, as though reluctant to witness this farewell. Janelle opened her mouth, but the words stuck in her throat. She swallowed visibly, then finally whispered, "Malik, please." Her voice trembled on the edge between apology and accusation, and I felt the old ache of empathy stir in my chest. I held the Rolex case at my side, careful not to let its weight slip from my grip. "This was the only thing my father left me," I said, voice low and steady. "You almost sold it for cash. You used his legacy to fund someone else's dream." The accusation landed like a stone in still water, ripples of guilt flashing across Janelle's face. She took a hesitant step closer, but Aubrey's silent presence stayed her. "I'm sorry," Janelle said, turning her gaze to the floor. "I made a terrible mistake." Mistake. The word felt too small for what she'd done. I inhaled slowly, tasting the tension in the air, an amalgam of perfume, stale coffee, and heartbreak. "I need to leave," I said, pressing the case against my hip. Cold panic flickered across her face. "We can fix this," she pleaded, stepping forward at last, arms outstretched as if she could catch me if I stumbled. "We can reimburse you, whatever it takes. Just don't walk out that door." Her words trembled, raw and vulnerable, and I realized she wasn't just fighting for our home. She was fighting for the life she had taken for granted. In that instant, I saw both the woman I once loved and the stranger who had betrayed me. The contradictions crystallized my resolve. I owed Dad and myself a fresh start. Without speaking, I turned and swept my hand across the dresser, gathering 2 suitcases I had already packed the night before. Inside were the bare essentials, a few changes of clothes, toiletries, Dad's compass and key tucked in one corner for safekeeping. I zipped them closed and wheeled them toward the door. Janelle's voice rose in panic. "Wait, Malik, please." She followed me down the hall, voice breaking. "Don't leave like this. We can work it out." But I was already halfway through the entryway, the front door looming like the threshold between captivity and freedom. I stopped and looked back at her, the morning light outlining her figure in soft gold. I could see the strain in her eyes, the regret shining through tears she tried to blink away. But remorse alone couldn't rebuild the trust she had shattered. My throat tightened as I swallowed the lump of emotion that threatened to squeeze me silent. "This isn't about fixing our marriage," I said, voice thick. "It's about rebuilding my life free from lies and theft." The words felt final, sealing the wound. I turned away and shouldered one suitcase, pulling the other behind me with steady determination. The front steps felt colder beneath my feet than they had in any winter morning I could remember. I paused at the bottom, glancing back at the house that had been my sanctuary, my prison, my home. Memories flooded in. Dad teaching me to ride a bike in the driveway, laughter filling the living room on Christmas morning, sunlit dinners on the deck. Now each memory felt tinged with loss, underscored by betrayal. I lifted my chin and squared my shoulders. The world beyond our front gate was uncertain, but it was mine to claim. I climbed into my car, heart pounding with the mixture of grief and liberation, and placed the Rolex case between the two suitcases in the passenger seat. I reached for the compass in my jacket pocket, the brass key nestled against the worn leather. Its weight grounded me with Dad's enduring presence. With one final look at the porch and the windows that had watched me grow up, I closed the door. Janelle's voice drifted to me, distant now. "I'm sorry, Malik." I started the engine and felt the car vibrate beneath me like a promise of change. As I pulled away from the curb, I let the weight of the house fall away until it was nothing more than a fading silhouette in my rearview mirror. The open road stretched ahead, and with every mile I put between me and that life, I felt a step closer to reclaiming the future my father had always believed I deserved. The morning light in Harbor Hill was gentler than I remembered most dawns being. Soft gold filtered through the oaks lining my new street, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace instead of the tight churn of betrayal in my chest. I carried Dad's compass and the letter I'd framed above my desk, the words "Steady men don't shout, they build," always greeting me as I stepped into my fresh two-bedroom home. The paint was still faintly scented, and I'd spent last weekend unloading boxes of tools and manuals, arranging each room with the care Dad had taught me. As I set a mug of coffee on the reclaimed wood countertop, the sun warmed the kitchen tiles, and I allowed myself a smile. I was finally home. That afternoon, Raina called with news. Within 2 months, she had recovered over $65,000 from unpaid contractor invoices, proof that Dad's meticulous records had been more than a hobby. She also confirmed that the bearer bonds, now in my name, were worth $143,500 when cashed. My gratitude for her tenacity surged through me, and I promised to meet her in her office to finalize the next steps. But before heading back to town, I resolved to honor Dad's memory here first. I stepped into the garage and retrieved his toolbox, the familiar scent of motor oil welcoming me as though he were beside me. I pulled down the wooden shelf where I'd stored the first box of reclaimed lumber and power tools and set to work on the built-in bookcases I'd sketched in my notebook. Sturdy shelves to hold memories, trophies, and perhaps one day, my own children's keepsakes. Each measured cut and careful joint felt like a conversation with him, his steady voice guiding my hands. Later, I drove to Raina's office, the compass key and watch safely tucked in my jacket. She greeted me with a firm handshake and led me to the conference room where she laid out documents for establishing the Townsend Legacy Foundation. The idea we'd sketched months earlier had grown into a concrete plan, a scholarship fund for engineering students with financial hardship, a grant program for families facing medical crises. As I reviewed the bylaws and mission statement, I felt a profound pride. This was the kind of building Dad had meant when he spoke of Steady Men building. Raina explained the remaining legal steps, filing paperwork with the state, securing nonprofit status, and setting up a custodial account for donations. Each task was another brick in a structure my father had envisioned, but I would bring to life. By the time I stepped back onto the sidewalk, dusk had begun to settle. The street lamps flickered on, casting long shadows that danced between the parked cars. I paused to look up at the sky, where the first stars pricked through the twilight, a reminder that, like the compass needle, my path had realigned with purpose. I reached into my pocket for the folded note from the watch and opened it once more. "This watch may be gone, son, but your future isn't. I left you more than time." Dad's handwriting looked almost living in the dim light. I traced each letter with my fingertip, feeling the final echo of his love and faith in me. Driving home, I mapped out the foundation's launch event in my mind. Inviting local students, showcasing the new bookcases filled with engineering textbooks and prototypes, presenting scholarships with a speech about my father's legacy. In our shared history, there had been pain and betrayal, but in this moment, there was creation, a reclamation of time spent, a testament to love that outlived loss. I returned to my new home under the canopy of oaks, placed the watch in its place on my nightstand, and slipped the compass into the drawer beside Dad's framed letter. As I lay in bed that night, I realized that rebuilding what mattered had not just restored my inheritance, it had honored a promise between father and son and set the course for every steady second yet to come. These days, I slip the Rolex Submariner onto my wrist with the ease of a man who has reclaimed both time and purpose. Its weight feels familiar now, a steady anchor against the currents of life rather than a tether to past loss. Each morning, before the sun peaks over the harbor's horizon, I wind the watch and feel its mechanism hum to life, the hands slicing through seconds with deliberate precision. It's both a ritual and a reminder. Dad's gift, once stolen and hidden away, has returned to its rightful place, marking every moment of my new life. When I glance down at its polished face, I'm reminded of the hidden note he slipped inside, a message folded small but carrying the weight of his hopes for me. I can almost hear his voice. If they steal your time, get it back. Your life is your own. Now go live it. Since moving into my Harbor Hill home, I've transformed the spare bedroom into a workshop-cum-study where I tinker on projects with the meticulous care Dad instilled in me. On the oak workbench lining the west wall rest my tools. A set of precision screwdrivers, pliers with well-worn grips, a magnifying loupe for inspecting the watch's intricate gears. Sunlight filters through the frosted windows in the morning, illuminating the dust motes that dance over my latest endeavor, restoring an antique marine chronometer I bought at auction, another testament to the passage of time and navigation. As I hold the chronometer's balance wheel between my fingertips, I think of all the stories Dad told me about crossing oceans, of how he navigated both storms at sea and storms in life with that same compass key I still carry in my jacket pocket. Now, in this sanctuary of craftsmanship and reflection, I feel connected to him more fully than ever before, carrying forward his legacy of steady diligence. My days follow a rhythm that balances work, community, and quiet moments of gratitude. By 7 each morning, I'm at the neighborhood cafe, the barista greeting me with a nod as she sets my black coffee before me. I take a seat by the window overlooking Harbor Hill Park, where joggers and dog walkers trace their routes along winding paths. I open my laptop and review foundation emails, coordinating with Raina to finalize grant applications and scholarship criteria. We recently approved our first round of recipients. 3 promising engineering students whose families faced medical hardships, names scrawled on applications that spoke of perseverance and dreams deferred by financial strain. As I sip my coffee and read their stories, I feel Dad's presence in each one, his belief in steady work and quiet resolve manifesting in the next generation. After the cafe, I walk to the old community center where we're hosting introductory workshops on basic mechanical skills, free to local teens. Today, I'm teaching a group how to disassemble and reassemble mechanical watches, starting with simple movements so they can see how each cog and spring works in harmony. The kids watch with wide-eyed fascination as I explain torque and balance, and I remember being that curious boy in Dad's garage, wide-eyed and eager to learn. One of the students, a shy girl named Marisol, carefully aligns the gear train under my guidance. When she secures the tiny screw and hears the movement tick, her face lights up like sunrise. I see in her the same spark Dad saw in me, and I realize that through these workshops, I am not only honoring his memory but also passing on the most precious lesson he ever taught me, that time, like life, is built one deliberate turn at a time. In the afternoons, I retreat to my desk to handle the administrative side of the Townsend Legacy Foundation. The nonprofit registration is complete, and donations are beginning to flow. Last week, I met with the local bank manager to set up a dedicated account and signatories, and now I work with our volunteer treasurer to draft our first annual report. Watching the figures balance and the goals align gives me a profound sense of continuity, from Dad's careful invoices tucked in Box 218 to my own spreadsheets that will help families weather financial storms. It's a tangible link between his past stewardship and my present stewardship, a bridge forged from bonds and bearer notes to scholarships and grants. Evenings are reserved for reflection and connection. I cook dinner, often a simple dish Dad taught me, like pan-seared salmon with lemon and garlic, while listening to his old jazz records spinning on the turntable in the living room. The saxophone's warm notes float through the house as I chop vegetables, and I imagine him beside me, sharing a quiet smile and a approving nod. I set the table for one and savor each bite, drinking in the flavors of memory and renewal. Afterwards, I step onto the back porch, the watch's luminescent markers glowing faintly as dusk settles over the harbor. The boats bob gently, their masts swaying in the evening breeze, and I feel an overwhelming gratitude for this second chance at life. On weekends, I take the Rolex with me wherever I go, hiking the coastal trails, biking along the riverfront, or simply walking the dog through my quiet street. Neighbors have started recognizing me. There goes Malik, out early again, they say with friendly waves. A few even mention seeing my name in the local paper when we announce the first scholarship recipients, and I reply with genuine warmth, knowing that our foundation's impact is only just beginning. Each time I hear the ticking of the watch against my wrist, I'm reminded that Dad's legacy is alive not only in metal and paper but in every life we touch. The watch itself has become more than a keepsake. It is a symbol of resilience and renewal. When I glance at it, I don't see the theft, the deception, or the hurt that once shadowed my heart. I see instead the turning gears of recovery, the hidden note that set me on this path, and the compass key that unlocked more than a bank box. It unlocked my future. I remember the day I drove away from that house, the weight of betrayal pressing on me, and I realize how far I've come. I reclaimed my father's watch, and in doing so, I reclaimed my own time, my own narrative from the clutches of lies. As the stars emerge overhead, I win the watch for the next day and tuck it into its place on the nightstand, a sentinel of passage and promise. I open the hidden compartment one last time, smoothing the aged paper that reads, "Your future isn't lost. Now go live it." I fold it carefully and place it beneath the watch, a private reminder of the blueprint Dad left me. Then I close my eyes, feeling the gentle pulse of time against my wrist and in my heartbeat. Tomorrow, I will wake and live each second with intention, teaching, building, giving back, and forging new memories. Time is mine again, as Dad always intended, and with every tick of the Rolex, I continue to honor his lasting gift. The freedom to chart my own course, guided by steady hands and an unwavering compass.